Have you ever wondered what happens when a once thriving empire loses its economic lifeline? France, once a dominant force in Africa, is now facing massive financial losses, with Air France alone losing 65 million euros due to its expulsion from the Sahel. France's grip on Africa is slipping, and it's leaving a hole in their economy that's hard to ignore. Once seen as a superpower in the region, France is now experiencing the painful reality of losing control over a significant portion of its economic resources. This dramatic shift is shaking not just France's financial sector, but also its political standing on the global stage. Let's dive into how this has happened, why it's happening, and what France might do next. Before we start, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the African Web, and ring the bell for more updates on Africa's evolving role in the world. For decades, France has relied on Africa as its economic backbone. Extracting wealth, particularly from former colonies, has allowed France to maintain its position as a major global economic power. French corporations dominated sectors like mining, aviation, and energy, while Africa remained underdeveloped, providing France with massive profits. But in recent years, this dynamic has dramatically changed, and the effects are now visible. The turning point began with the rise of revolutionary military leaders in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. These countries' leaders have firmly rejected France's dominance. They brought about a watershed moment that has shaken France's economic grip on the region. The expulsion of French troops, companies, and political influence from the Sahel has left France reeling. And nowhere is this impact more significant than with Air France. Air France operations in Africa were a major source of income, with the airline generating millions of euros daily from routes connecting France to various African capitals. For decades, Air France enjoyed a monopoly on flights between Paris and several African countries, and it was a key player in the transportation of goods and people across the continent. However, the rise of anti-French sentiment, particularly in the Sahel region, has resulted in the suspension of Air France's services from key markets such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. This expulsion has cost Air France dearly, with the airline losing approximately 65 million euros as a direct result. Air France operations were a cornerstone of France's economic influence in the region, as it facilitated trade and business connections, while also offering a lifeline to French expatriates and businesses operating in Africa. The airline's loss represents not only a significant financial blow, but also a symbolic defeat for French influence in Africa. Air France's failure to regain access to these markets highlights the broader decline of France's economic power in the region, as African nations are increasingly turning to non-French airlines and companies for their travel and trade needs. With the growing influence of African carriers and international airlines from Asia and the Middle East, Air France's position is becoming increasingly precarious. France has long profited from Africa's rich resources, particularly gold, uranium, and lithium, through unfair mining deals. These resources were extracted by French companies, with minimal benefit for the African nations. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger were major contributors to France's gold and uranium supply. But as these nations reclaimed their sovereignty and nationalized their resources, France has lost its access to these vital commodities. This has resulted in a severe loss of income and industrial power for France, with the country's energy sector, particularly nuclear energy, facing significant destruction. One of the most critical losses for France has come from Niger, a country that has supplied France with uranium for over 50 years. Orano, France's largest nuclear energy company, relied heavily on Niger's uranium mines for over 35% of France's uranium supply. But with the rise of military leadership in Niger, the country suspended uranium exports to France. As a result, France's nuclear power industry now faces higher costs for uranium from alternative suppliers, causing further strain on its energy security. With Niger also renegotiating deals with Russia and China, France's position as a leader in the global nuclear energy market is being threatened. In addition to that, France has historically dominated Africa's oil and gas sector through companies like Total Energies. However, with the expulsion of French firms from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Total Energies has seen its operations crumble. Niger has frozen oil exports to France, and other countries are turning to China and Russia for energy partnerships. This loss of control over African energy resources is putting France in a vulnerable position, as it faces the high costs of importing energy from other parts of the world. French companies have historically controlled much of the infrastructure development in Africa, including highways, railways, and energy projects. But with the rise of new leaders in the Sahel, these contracts are being reallocated to other countries, particularly China, Russia, and Turkey. The days of France's influence over infrastructure development are over, as the Sahel nations are prioritizing local businesses and more equitable partnerships. The combined losses in the mining, energy, aviation, and infrastructure sectors have left France's economy in a precarious position. The once powerful nation, which relied on Africa for cheap resources and economic dominance, is now facing a financial crisis. The country's nuclear, mining, and energy sectors are in freefall, and its international trade position is eroding as African nations turn to other partners. France's corporate giants, like Total and Air France, are losing their grip on Africa, and the country's economic future is uncertain. The decline of French economic influence in Africa is part of a larger trend of decolonization and the rise of African self-determination. France's reliance on Africa's resources and markets has made it vulnerable to the growing movement of African nations reclaiming control of their own economies. As the economic landscape shifts, France must find new ways to maintain its global power or risk being relegated to the sidelines. The collapse of France's economic dominance in Africa has wider implications for its role on the global stage. As anti-French sentiment grows across Africa, other former colonies are beginning to reconsider their relationships with France. Countries like Chad, Ivory Coast, and Cameroon are becoming more aligned with China, Russia, and other emerging powers. This shift in African alliances is weakening France's influence not only in Africa but also in the global political and economic arena. The loss of French influence in Africa could signal the decline of France's role as a major global power, as the country's economic strength is increasingly tied to its relationship with the continent. As we look to the future, the question remains, can France find a way back into Africa's good graces, or will it be forced to watch as its influence continues to erode? Some argue that France must change its approach, moving away from exploitation and working with African nations on more equitable terms. However, with the growing influence of China, Russia, and other global players, it may be too late for France to reclaim its former position of dominance. The future of France's economic power in Africa remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: Africa is no longer dependent on France, and it's poised to chart its own path towards economic independence. What do you think? Will France manage to find a way back into Africa, or is this the beginning of a new era where Africa stands on its own? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos on Africa's growing power and influence.